There it is. There it is, yeah. There you go. Oh, yeah. There you go. There you go. There you go. Before we get going, I'd like to remind you that if you like what you see, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you get quality content and I get closer to making this a full-time gig. 90% of the time I'm posting car reviews, so this is a little bit different, but I think that this is an important topic to tackle and one that a lot of people have requested me to do, so here we are. If Samson looks a little scared, it's probably because it turns out he's afraid of the camera. You probably shouldn't be eating that. So I've tried to make this as comforting to him as possible. I brought his favorite treats. He likes to sit in the middle because he's afraid of windows, and probably not too keen on the GoPro 2. I'm not sure if he's noticed that yet. To start things off, I've purchased cars from pretty much every type of seller you got. I bought a car off of Craigslist. I bought used cars from new car dealerships. I bought them from tiny buy here, pay here dealerships, and I've sold cars myself and for a dealership. Now, my first and number one recommendation for buying your first car or buying a cheap car is, and it's probably not going to be possible for most of you, check around with your relatives, your family, close friends of your family, for people that maybe have cars, you know, with 100-something thousand miles. They were just thinking of trading them in. They're 10, 15 years old, because those cars are not worth very much to dealerships. And like, say if somebody comes in with a 2010 Honda Civic with 120,000 miles, it's a pretty good first car if you ask me. The trade-in value, however, is going to be closer to maybe $2,000, maybe $3,000, depending on what trim it is. So striking an awesome deal with them might be feasible, and if it ends up having a ton of issues, you probably got it for less than wholesale cost, so you shouldn't be in a big hole. Most of you won't be able to get a car from relatives or close family and friends, and that's fine. If you can't, then where should you buy a car? You're gonna have three major options. One, buy from a private seller. A private car seller is going to be a more personal experience. They also don't have overhead like a dealership would, so they don't need to pay other people. It's pretty simple. You cut out the middleman, you're gonna get a better price. New car dealerships, however, do have an advantage. That advantage is that they have a name to save. If something goes wrong with that car immediately, they don't want you pointing fingers at them. These new car and well-established dealers thrive off of word of mouth. While they won't sell a 10-year-old plus car or one that has over 100,000 miles with a warranty, these dealers don't want to keep junk on their lot. Usually they go through an oil change, the managers drive them, and if they seem terrible, they don't want to keep them, as it makes them look bad. Hell, I've seen times where my dealership actually stepped up to fix or help fix a car they just sold because they don't want to screw over a customer like that. Now, I have to reiterate, these vehicles that are over 10 years old or have over 100,000 miles are not getting inspected in any way that would imply a warranty. And you should definitely still take caution when purchasing from a new car dealer. They're just the slightly more reputable way to buy a cheaper car. I know there's some guy about to comment,
"Dealerships are the embodiment of Satan preying on the precious Lamb of God."
While I won't comment much on morals and motive here, dealers with a prominent presence in a community most definitely want to save face. If they are having customers who bought as-is cars running around telling everyone how many problems they had right after they bought it, that will affect business in the long run, and they don't want that. Now, I have seen some reputable dealers make some questionable decisions before, but chances are, if they know a car is a complete shitter, they're going to send it to an auction where a less reputable, most likely buy here, pay here dealership will try to sell it. You want a little nub? All right, we need to feed him a little nub. There you go. I can tell he's getting a little anxious. New car dealerships are a little bit more safe. Now, if you're buying a car that's over 10 years old and has more than 100,000 miles, it's gonna be a little bit more tricky to finance them. Sometimes you won't be able to finance them at a larger dealership. And so then you go to a buy here, pay here lot. They will have their own financing there, which often is going to have far worse terms on the loan. But sometimes they have the car that you want for the price that you want. They have much less overhead and are consistently cheaper than what a new car dealer would be if you're buying with cash or outside financing.
I personally would trust a private seller more, but each situation is different.
One thing that you should do to every single car sale, every single one, if you're buying a used car, get the damn thing inspected. Now, I'm not talking about go to Firestone and do the $10 inspection. I think that's an option, and I would recommend taking it. It's usually going to be somewhere between $50 and $70. Take it to an independent mechanic and get that thing inspected, because there could be some big issues that are lingering there that your little peek underneath the car is not going to catch. I have done this myself. I have not gotten cars inspected, and I told myself I would, then I didn't. Not a smart idea. I was just buying a track car. But if you're buying a car that's supposed to go to your son, daughter, or to yourself if you're 16, or if you're just buying a car that needs you to get to A to B without problems, please get it inspected. Another big reason to get the car inspected is to help with negotiations. Because say the car comes back and yeah, most things are fine, but it's going to need new struts soon. It needs an alignment. There's hundreds of miscellaneous small problems that the car could have that you might miss, that the mechanic might catch. And if you bring that up to the seller, they're much more apt to negotiate with you. I've been on both sides of this. Now, when it comes to trying to find these cars, I am going to recommend AutoTrader or Auto Tempest.
The latter of which searches all car buying websites, including Craigslist. However, due to the possibility of human error on listings, I'd still individually check Craigslist and look into Facebook Marketplace as well. Now, what about the cars you should be looking for? Well, I could make a whole series on this if I wanted, so let's keep it brief. Firstly, a cheap Mercedes, Audi, BMW, Jaguar, etc. is 9 times out of 10 a bad idea for a budget buyer. While there are some solid models out there like a manual trans E46 3 Series, on average even the E46 will cost more to maintain and have more expensive parts than some of the cars that I'm going to mention later. With the right care, some of these exotic luxury cars can last a really long time, but it's still a gamble that I wouldn't recommend to people on a tight budget. If you want a fun first car, a Civic Si or Mazda 3 should do the trick without putting your wallet in a camel clutch.
Even if you have service records dating 10 years back, a lot of them have fundamental flaws, very expensive parts, numerous gremlins lying underneath that you might not see, and sometimes even a mechanic won't be able to catch. I can't recommend it to somebody that is on a very strict budget. Now, if you're, say, very well versed with BMWs and you see a $5,000 BMW and you have, still a few grand left in your budget, sure, go ahead. But if your budget is $5,000 and you need to keep your running costs as low as possible and you're not a mechanic, don't do it. Don't do it. When it comes to purchasing that first car or that cheap car, honestly, there are plenty of good cars out there. I'm going to recommend that you check cars.com reviews, AutoTrader reviews, Consumer Reports, carcomplaints.com to check and see if there's any consistent problems with these cars. Because sometimes there will be, and you won't know it. For instance, 2007 or 2008 Toyota RAV4 sounds like a very reliable car. Toyota RAV4s are known for reliability, and we all know Toyota. However, they had, if you didn't get the V6, the 2.4 liter engine that consumed an ungodly amount of oil and would eventually be detrimental to the engine. So, not a good buy, and that's actually very common. Honda with the CR-V had similar issues. Honda also had very big AC issues. And these are a lot of things that most people won't know, and because they think Honda and Toyota, very reliable all the time. Make sure to research that individual model and year, because you might find something that nobody has brought up to you yet. Could be a class action lawsuit, who knows? So do your research on that specific model and their common problems. Now, cars that I recommend in particular that you can get for cheap and that should last a long time. Number one on the list, actually number one and number two, Mazda 3, Honda Fit. Both are excellent vehicles, especially if you get the second generation Honda Fit, as that model smooths the edges out. The Mazda 3, if you look at the second generation, didn't have the rust problems of the first generation. Mazda built everything extremely well, plus they're not really that expensive. That's another thing to mention. Cars are cheaper than SUVs and trucks. That sounds intuitive, but seriously, it's actually a very big margin. Now, if you're looking for an SUV, my recommendation is actually going to be the 2002 to 2006 Honda CR-V, especially with the 5-speed manual. Not only is that kind of cool that they had a manual transmission with that car, but it was also quite reliable, and much more reliable than the generation that preceded it. They still had their own small problems, definitely including the AC. Now, some cars that I think a lot of people forget that are actually pretty great deals for what they are would be really anything Mitsubishi. Now, is quality great with them? No. I'm driving a Mitsubishi Outlander right now that costed me a little bit over $8,000. However, it had 70,000 miles, a V6 engine, one owner, clean Carfax, and it's a 2011. You get a lot of features for the money. Looking into Mitsubishi actually isn't a bad idea because they have really crappy resale and surprisingly good engines and transmissions for the most part. I wouldn't get any models kind of pre-2005. They used to have head gasket problems way back in the day, but these models usually are pretty good. Parts can be a little bit more expensive because they tend to be on the rare side, but they're not too bad.
If you need a more traditional truck or SUV, an old Ford Ranger, especially with a manual transmission, is a good truck.
I ain't no stranger. I know that truck. That's a Ford fucking Ranger.
And usually quite a bit cheaper than the great, outside of the rust, Toyota Tacoma or 4Runner. Another good truckish option that is cheaper than the Toyotas would be the pre-2005 Nissan Pathfinder. But keep in mind, resale is stronger on trucks. You will lose out on safety equipment, and these trucks will be much older than the comparable cars. For sub $3,000 cars, manual transmission Civics, Pontiac Vibes, Toyota Corollas, and Solloras are my personal favorites. If you want something more luxurious, I'd recommend an Infiniti with the old VQ V6 like the G35, or pretty much any Lexus. However, with a vast majority of luxury models, they're going to carry a higher running cost with them, and even Lexus still has problems in their lineup too, like the first gen Lexus RX's transmission problems. There are so many great cars out there, some from even German brands, like for instance the VW Rabbit 2.5. So anyway, if you find something you like, do that research I talked about earlier. You might find a hidden gem or even a hidden lemon. I just wanted to point out some of my top picks here, and some cars that are overlooked.
Now, this is more subjective, a parting thought if you will. Manual transmissions are going to earn a big recommendation for me as a first car, especially if you get them before the driver actually gets their license. If they just have a permit or something, they can learn for a month or two. It makes them really stay focused on the road. Something that I think is very dangerous to new drivers is when they start to have this misguided confidence after only a few months of driving, and they start to lose focus on things or start to not pay as close attention. A manual transmission kind of reinstates that focus, and it's also a far more engaging way to move around a sub $10,000 car, if you ask me. And I think that's quite valuable to new drivers and old drivers alike. Plus, they're a lot cheaper to work on or replace usually than an automatic transmission, and typically will have less problems, especially if you start looking at specifics. Honda used to have a tendency to have crappy automatic transmissions. Now, it doesn't mean that they always fail, but there were a lot of people reporting issues with them. So a manual transmission solves that problem in most cases. That's it from Samson and I today. Thank you for tuning in for Pitbull Pit Stop Episode 3. Put in some suggestions for the next episode that I will be doing in like a year. Again, if you liked it, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next review.